Good afternoon. Before I start my presentation, I have a confession to make. The views you hear today are solely mine. They don't represent, not only do they not represent the views of the Commission and its staff, they don't represent anybody's views but mine. So keep that in mind. As Arlene said, if you tweet anything I said, you have to add that disclaimer to the beginning of the tweet. You know why? There have to be some of you sitting out there thinking, why do we need to hear from somebody that's responsible for policy? What in the world does that have to do with XBRL? Good question. I'm not a technology specialist. Walter can attest, I'm certainly not an XBRL expert. I'm an auditor. As was said in the introduction, I spent 32 years with Grant Thornton, and during that time I held a number of different positions, but I was always an auditor. And as an auditor, my values are drawn from the U.S. Professional Code of Conduct for CPAs. As a CPA, I have a duty to exercise due care and act with integrity and objectivity in serving investors. In other words, as a CPA and an auditor, I have an obligation to call it as I see it and to set aside my self-interest when serving those investors. And today, as a senior officer in the Office of the Chief Accountant, I'm also guided by the SEC's mandate to protect investors and the Office of the Chief Accountant's responsibility to oversee the financial reporting process in the United States and to ensure that public companies provide useful, reliable information to investors. And those are the reasons that I'm here. To call it the way it is, without regard to self-interest, and to contribute to improving the reliability and usefulness of the information that is provided to investors. This afternoon, I want to cover 4 topics: disruption and change, current status at the SEC, where we are with the IFRS taxonomy, and what we see on the horizon. Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen, in his 1997 best-selling book, The Innovator's Dilemma, coined the term disruptive technology. That term was used to describe a new technology that unexpectedly replaces an established technology. Disruptive technology lacks refinement, often has performance problems because it is new, appeals to a limited audience, and may not yet have a proven practical application. If you think back to when the SEC mandated the filing of XBRL tagged information, it's clear that what I just said about a disruptive technology was true. Christensen went on to demonstrate how it is not unusual to dismiss the value of a disruptive technology, only to be blindsided as the technology matures, gains a larger audience and market share, and threatens the status quo. When we started the program to file XBRL tagged information in 2009, we expected interactive data reporting to increase the amount of financial data available to investors in at least 3 ways. First, an increase in the coverage of small reporting companies. Second, an increase in the level of financial data available in electronic format by those companies, and an increase in the services as a result of interactive data tagging. And finally, an increase in the number of suppliers of financial services products because of requiring companies to file interactive data. So what have we seen? That rule contained our estimate of the cost to tag information. What we've seen over the past year is we've seen those costs plummet in the U.S. Today, if you were to go back to that rule, you would see that the cost to tag information for filing with the SEC is substantially less than what we expected in 2009. Why has that happened? Well, it's happened for a couple of reasons. One, we've seen new, improved products come into the marketplace that didn't exist in 2009. We've now seen the data aggregators start to use that information in their models. We've seen new players come into the marketplace that didn't exist 2.5 years ago. So where are we today? Today we're in the third year of a 4-year phase-in. We have 1,700 companies that have completed that phase-in. And by the end of this year, we will have 8,300 companies filing tagged information. But I think it's important to remember that these are still early days in this mandate. We have 1 more year to go in the phase-in. And I hope, I hope in the first half of 2012, we will have an SEC Commission-approved taxonomy for IFRS. Consequently, it will be at least 3 more years, at least, and perhaps a little bit longer, before we have completed the full implementation of the XBRL mandate. Just to go a little bit deeper on where we are, just indulge me for a minute, because I want to brag now. Not about me, about our team, certainly, and actually about how the companies have reacted to this mandate. For the second calendar quarter of this year, 95% of the Phase 1 and 2 companies filed the XBRL exhibit timely, and the remaining 5% filed an amendment within the grace period. So that's the 1,700 companies that I referred to earlier. They all filed timely, and most of them filed without the grace period, substantially all of them. There was a lot of concern expressed about the capacity in the marketplace to absorb the onslaught of the Phase 3 filers. So let's look at what happened with the Phase 3 filers in the second quarter. 80% of those companies filed the exhibit timely. 80%. At the end of the grace period, and this is the stat I love, at the end of the grace period, only 2% of the Phase 3 companies had not filed their XBRL exhibit. 2%. That 2%, by the way, represented about 97 companies. So a very small number when you look at the total population. What's really interesting when you dig into that 97 companies is that 89% of those were what we call smaller reporting companies. So very small companies. And a third of those small reporting companies were shell companies. Shell companies that have no operations. So when you step back from that concern about the marketplace to absorb that onslaught of Phase 3 filers was not well-founded. What does that tell you? That tells you that we have a rapidly maturing marketplace in the United States for filing tagged information with the SEC. Well, I know nobody wants, I could probably skip this slide, move right on. I can't tell you how many times I'm asked, when are we going to have a taxonomy for foreign private issuers? In fact, I probably can't tell you how many times I've been asked that question in the approximately one day that I've been here in Montreal. Well, the staff of the SEC is working closely with the IFRS Foundation team as they enhance the IFRS taxonomy. And let me be real clear about our objective. I don't want anybody to leave here not understanding what we want to accomplish. We want all SEC registrants to file tagged financial information, and that includes the foreign private issuers. And we will get that accomplished. As I said earlier, I am hopeful that during the first half of 2012, the staff will be in a position to recommend to the Commission for approval the IFRS taxonomy. Rest assured that regardless of when the Commission approves an IFRS taxonomy, we will provide ample time for foreign private issuers to prepare for that initial filing. We have experience. We know that that first filing takes time. It's a big change, so we will make sure that foreign private issuers have ample time to get ready for that initial filing. However, before we get to a recommendation, there are two steps that need to take place. First, the staff needs to review the actual application of the IFRS taxonomy by companies that are participating in a volunteer tagging program that's sponsored by the IFRS Foundation. Second, each element in the taxonomy needs to have an appropriate definition. In other words, guidance on when it's appropriate to use an element. That doesn't exist today. In our view, that has to happen. We met this morning with Olivier and his team, and we discussed that topic, and we agreed on a process to move forward to accomplish those two objectives. We've been talking, as I'm sure Olivier would agree, frequently over the last several months on how to accomplish that mutual objective of having a taxonomy that the SEC staff can recommend to the Commission for approval. And the purpose of that review that we have to do is to obtain assurance that the attributes for all taxonomy elements result in an appropriate element selection. In other words, that the selected element appropriately reflects the financial reporting concept and will be easily understood by a user of that information. There were a few of you in the board meeting this morning, and you heard me emphasize how important it is that the information be usable by investors. Our objective is not to come up with neat tools. Our objective is not to have a nice graphic toy. Our objective is not to solve big problems. Our objective is simply to make sure that we're providing investors with reliable, useful information. Because the element definition provides significant information, the staff believes that there should be a definition for all elements that provides the information necessary to select that element. To the extent practicable, the element definition should meet the following criteria. It should represent the financial concept, the financial reporting concept. It should result in comparable tagging for like types of financial information. And lastly, it should enable knowledgeable users to understand and analyze the financial information. Now let me step back and reiterate one more time. We are working closely with the XBRL team at the IFRS Foundation to complete the review of the actual application of the taxonomy and to determine how to provide definitions for those taxonomy elements. And we share a common goal. We share a common goal to put the staff in a position to recommend to the Commission a taxonomy for approval. Now, rest assured that once that taxonomy is approved, foreign private issuers will have sufficient lead time to prepare for the initial filing, and perhaps most importantly, will not be required, let me repeat that, will not be required to file detailed tagging of footnotes until the beginning of the second year after the initial filing. In other words, we are going to stick to the original timeline that we set in motion in 2009. So anyone who is concerned about having to go immediately to detailed tagging, put that concern aside. It's not a real concern. Well, it worked. I'll tell you a quick story without attribution. Since they ran over on their time, and I guess time is meaningless, so I'm going to tell you a story. We, as I'm sure you've encountered, there are people who kind of doubt whether or not this stuff works. They don't understand what Wassam said earlier, that it's really just about putting information in a format that a machine can read, and then you need software to enable or to tell that machine what to do with the information it can now read. So it's not real complicated. Even I understand it. As you'll recall, I'm a policy person. So we did something at the SEC. We ran a test on data, and it came up with some really good results. And some of those doubters really got excited. And the one I remember the most, I can't tell you who said this, but the one I remember the most was the person who said, it works most of the time. So what do we see on the horizon? Well, technology improvements will continue to drive cost down, the cost to produce and consume data. And those costs are going to continue to go down rapidly. The current overseas outsourcing by aggregators in the U.S. will reverse and come back to the U.S. The number of companies bringing tagging activity in-house will continue to accelerate. Now, what we've seen in the U.S. is that initially a lot of those companies in that population of 1,700 outsourced the tagging. What we're now seeing is a substantial number, and that number continues to grow, of companies bringing that activity in-house where they control the process. And by the way, by controlling the process, some of the problems that they ran into all of a sudden just disappear. That's because the technology's improved and they built it into their processes. It's not just an add-on or a bolt-on. The third thing that we see are a number of technology companies developing and distributing very specialized tools for authoring XBRL. That will also continue to drive the cost down. It will make the effort substantially less. Fourth thing, we are aware that there are startups and established companies that are working on consumption products for individuals. And while we're aware of some that are doing that, I'm confident that there are others in stealth mode that are doing it as well. We always talk about, I listen to discussions about what's the tipping point. Well, I would submit the tipping point could come when you can actually consume this data easily, and it can be consumed by individuals. And we're not that far away from that happening. The last thing that I see on the horizon that's worth mentioning, industry groups are beginning to convene to consider standardization of taxonomy, taxonomy extensions I'm so excited about this, I get choked up. Taxonomy extensions and disclosure formats. Standardization of extensions and disclosure formats by industry will lead to clearer, more focused disclosure. And I hope, and by the way, if you want to tweet something, you can tweet this. I hope that standard setters pay attention to those efforts. In closing, I want to emphasize 4 points. The cost of tagging financial information is declining and will continue to do so. The marketplace is continuing to introduce new and improved tools and services to produce and analyze structured data. The use of structured data is increasing and will continue to increase as the amount of data available increases and as new and improved tools come on the market. Now, I said I wanted to emphasize 4 points. If you only remember 1 point, I want you to remember this last point. The most effective regulatory tool is a well-informed market. A market that can and does make investment decisions based on high-quality information that is delivered timely and transparently. When one considers the recent financial crisis and past financial scandals, it is indisputably clear that the benefits of structured data far outweigh the transitional cost of implementing this new process for producing, distributing, and consuming financial information. There is no doubt in my mind that transparent, timely, quality information can be a safety belt for our global economy. I want to thank all of you who have been pioneers in leading this change, in leading this revolution. And I want to conclude by recognizing the efforts of a small but dedicated team at the SEC. Jeff Nauman, Walter Hampshire, Susan Yant, Ted Eulinger, and Tony Mealy. I can tell you that without their commitment and dedication, our program at the SEC simply would not be where it is today. Thank you.